I'm Diane Prince, and I'm here to present how to start a staffing agency. I built a staffing agency totally from scratch with no experience in staffing or recruiting from the ground up. Also did not have experience in business ownership or entrepreneurship. And in just 6 years, built it to 8 figures and sold it to a public company for $28 million. Now, before we get started, go ahead and connect with me on LinkedIn if you're not already, where I share a ton of educational information for staffing and recruiting agency owners. And let's get started. We're going to go over 3 main points in this presentation: why you can do this, how you can do it, and what you need to do next to set up your staffing offering in your recruiting agency. I'm going to share with you getting set up, how to do it, what that looks like, the money, how to calculate pricing and how much money you are going to make, how to forecast that, and making placements. I'm going to share what's the market like in staffing today. As of 2023, the temp staffing industry in the US alone was $218 billion. 40% of the US workforce is now made up of temporary workers, contingent workers. By 2050, it's estimated that 50% of the US workforce will be freelance or contingent, meaning temporary or contractors. And 83% of executives in the US report increased contingent labor usage. The staffing industry is not going away. Let's talk about some myths that we hear about staffing, or maybe even you believe some of these things, or maybe you think that some of these you've hesitated on staffing because you think these things might be true. One is that it's too complicated. Okay, it's true. Staffing can be more complicated than direct hire, but look, I did direct hire years after I sold my staffing agency, and I was like, whoa, well, we're going to talk about that shortly, but the consistency of staffing totally outweighs the complications. And we're going to talk about how there are companies out there that make it really simple for you. It's saturated. It is definitely not saturated. From our last slide, we talked about how the industry is growing and there's always new opportunities, just like you see in direct hire. And another myth or hesitation is you need a lot of money to get started. And I actually used to think this too, but now I know that there are companies out there that are ready to fund your staffing payroll immediately. So we'll talk about that as we go forward. And I can introduce you to people who are ready to fund your staffing and get you going right away. And this one kind of baffles me that perm placement is more prestigious. I never even heard this until recently. I did perm placement several years after selling my staffing agency because an agency that started when I started my first one and that I had sold many years prior, like 15 years prior, for $28 million. This agency hired me because they were still at about $5 million in revenue. They were only doing direct hire, and the owners were trying to start contract because they wanted to build and create a retirement plan for themselves. But we'll talk about that in the next slide. So now we've talked about where the industry is, what's happening in the staffing industry, and some common myths and misperceptions that you might have about staffing. So now I'm going to talk about why you need staffing in your recruiting agency. First of all, you need recurring revenue. When you have recurring revenue with temp staffing, it's unlike direct hire where you're literally starting from scratch you're starting over every month and waiting for those placements to hit. When you have temporary staffing, you have recurring revenue that is consistent so that you can really build a business that either is an asset that you can sell or something that you might keep as a lifestyle business, but you're not going to have that crazy roller coaster of wondering when your next placement is going to hit so that you can pay your bills. You'll also really enjoy that passive income, right? So when you place temporary workers, then you realize you're making money as you're doing other things. Like when you're on vacation, you can literally have people who are working on assignment and you're bringing in the money from their working on assignment. You can also have a diversification of clients, which is truly important. And you should have that anyway if you have even if you have a perm placement. But when you diversify your client base in staffing, what it does is you're embedding yourself. Your clients actually cannot even function without you because you have employees there who are on your payroll, right? So what happened to me during the 2008 financial crisis, my biggest client was Countrywide Home Loans. Their CEO was literally the face of the 2008 financial crisis. But and we lost all their business because they sold to Bank of America, but we did not lose we lost the new business, but we still had temporary employees working there. So that gave us time to adjust to the transition. And at the same time, we were diversified. So even though we took a hit, we were diversified because we were in other businesses and also deeply entrenched into those businesses because our temps were helping their business to function. Okay. There's no waiting when you place temp employees. There's no waiting for guarantee periods. You know that moment when you're waiting for maybe you have a 90-day, 60-day guarantee and you've got your money set aside in escrow just in case your person doesn't work out. With contractors or temporary employees, if they don't work out, you replace them, but you also have already earned that money and nothing resets, right? Because you're going to be making money hourly. And we'll talk about that. We'll talk about that later. So you also have exponential value creation in your business. When you're doing direct hire, you don't have value in your business. The value is only you or your recruiters who are making the placements. But when you build a staffing agency, you actually can exit and your value could be 3 to 8 times what your profits are when you go to sell your business, if that's what you decide to do. And you also will have a retirement plan from your staffing agency that you don't necessarily have in your direct hire agency unless you're really disciplined and putting money away or investing in other areas and diversifying your investments. Okay, I'm not sharing this to brag or anything, but I'm just showing you this to see this could be you. Okay, this was me after 6 years from starting my business to selling it. And because this sale was to a public company, it's public information. Other sales that I've done are private, but here you can see the combination of the money and the wire. So this was such an exciting day, as you can imagine, in my life. And just culmination of all of that hard work and really focused work on making this happen. So you can see wire transfer for $15 million, $15,666,000. And then we also had a $13 million earnout that we earned. Now, normally earnout, you can't always count on your earnout, but we did earn it. So that was exciting. And we tied in our team so that we were very methodical about getting to our earnout. So I just wanted to share this with you, our asset purchase agreement, which you can find online. Sometimes it's fun to look back at this and remember the feeling of getting that wire transfer was epic. Okay. When talking about staffing and temporary employees, I would be remiss not to give a little warning on employee misclassification. This is also a reason why your clients need you as a temporary employment agency, because misclassification means when companies misclassify workers as 1099 contractors, that can result in major fines. And you may not know this, but it's not up to you or the person working for you to decide and agree if they're going to be 1099. There's actually federal laws that regulate whether or not somebody is a 1099. So one thing about temporary employment staffing agencies, you're actually doing something that your clients are not capable of doing. Okay, think about that. As opposed to a direct hire, just direct hire, in a temp staffing agency, you are doing something for your clients that they cannot do for themselves. Hopefully by now you're convinced that starting a temporary staffing agency or adding temp staffing to your already existing offerings is important and is something that you're excited about. You see the potential. We've talked about being able to get recurring revenue, have revenue that you can count on. And now we're going to talk about how it works. Okay. And so here's how you make money in staffing. And people think that direct hire is much more profitable than staffing. And if you look at it in face value and say, okay, I'm going to make a 60K placement or a placement that gets me $60,000 as a fee. Well, if you look at it, yes, your cost of goods is zero on making that placement, but you also have to look at the time that it took you to make that placement, the recruiters that it took you, and all of the other factors. And a lot of times those placements fall through. So one way that you can look at it is typically when you figure out your bill rate and pay rate for your temp jobs, oftentimes it is the same over time that you would get for a direct hire fee or more, because often assignments last longer. They often extend. And you don't have to wait for that guarantee period to start getting paid on that, to start getting your money. So first we have the bill rate. The bill rate is the rate that your company charges your client. When you're negotiating, and we won't get too into this, but when you're negotiating with your client, you don't talk about the markups typically unless they specifically ask. You talk about your bill rate. So you ask them, what is your budget? What is the bill rate for this role? Okay. The burden rate is all of your expenses related to that temp employee. And don't worry about it, because there are companies, and I have partnerships with companies that will do your whole back office, meaning all of the operations, and handle the complicated part, which is the compliance and the unemployment taxes and things like that, and the laws. They will handle all of that for you, and we'll do the math in the I think it's the next slide. We're going to do the math. And so the burden rate means all of the statutory expenses required by law that you're required to pay. Okay. Then there's the pay rate. The pay rate is the rate that you're going to pay the contractor. So if you might bill $140 an hour and you might pay your contractor $100 an hour, that would be a 40% markup. So the markup is the percentage that's charged on top of what the pay rate is. Okay. And then the gross margin is the money that you make after. That's the pay rate minus your rate with the burden. Okay, I'm going to show you some examples in case it's complicated. And there's also sometimes a conversion fee, and a conversion fee means the fee that you charge if your temp employee or contractor becomes a permanent employee. This is usually negotiated at the beginning of the assignment. Sometimes it's written into your contract and then it can be negotiated. And often it might be when somebody's been working on the assignment for 6 months. Sometimes then the client gets there's no conversion fee. Oftentimes that's waived, and sometimes there's a fee, and usually there's a calculation so that if somebody only is on assignment for 3 months and they want to make that person a permanent employee, there's usually a conversion based on how many hours they've worked, where you'll get that. You'll charge a fee at the end of that, and it's all negotiable. So be prepared to negotiate, and I can help you with that. Let's go over the specific example. Let's say you have a contract employee or a temporary employee on assignment whose pay rate is $100 an hour. And let's say that you're using like full service, back office, getting your payroll funded, and your cost for this employee is $119 an hour. Now, if you're doing all of that yourself, it might be as low as about $113 an hour. Your bill rate, say that your bill rate is $140 an hour. This is the rate that you charge your client. In this scenario, your gross margin is $21 an hour. So do the math. If you have, or we'll do it together, if you have 10 contractors or temp employees on assignment over 1 year, so if you do $21 an hour times 10, that's 10 people in this example, okay, that's $210 an hour for 10 employees in this scenario, which would equal $420,000 a year in gross margin. So now you know how to calculate markups and your profit. But here are some markup ranges by industry. And so engineering, typically, this is pretty wide range, 35 to 55%. That would be like hardware. Tech and IT, I mean, again, huge range, 40 to 70%. Other professional staffing, anywhere from 50 to 100%. Administrative can be 30 to 75%, and light industrial 35 to 65%. When you're calculating your costs, you're also going to want to know what your workers' comp code is, and that depends. It's different if it's light industrial or clerical, but you don't need to know all of this. You can ask your employer of record and make sure that you're going to add those into your costs so you can calculate your cost of goods. If you need to do background checks, that's also going to be in your cost of goods. You're probably going to want to work with small to medium-sized companies because that's where these markups typically are higher. When you go to bigger companies like Fortune companies, they typically are using a vendor management provider or a master service provider, and sometimes margins there are very, very low. I had one division in my agency that's all we did, but we operated it as a separate division that was high volume, low margin staffing. So that's one thing that you can do if that's your business model. But otherwise, these are some typical markup ranges by industry. Something you'll hear a lot in the contract world is temp to hire or contract to hire. And these are fantastic. These are so great because a lot of times with temp staffing, what happens is you sort of set it and forget it. So people ask me, well, isn't there a lot of management in having temp workers? It kind of depends on your industry, but sometimes, yes, if they will call you sometimes if they can't show up, but usually once they're on assignment for a while, they're pretty embedded into the company, into your client. And lots of times when I've had people on temp to hire assignments, they last on assignment a lot longer than anticipated. And so sometimes assignments can last for quite a long period of time. But the definition of temp to hire is when a candidate is hired temporarily with the goal of converting to a permanent position. When you have those kinds of positions, sometimes your client will want you to find out what your contractor's desired salary is because their hourly rate will be different than their salary. So they want to know that to make sure that they fit in, that salary will fit into their range. And we talked about conversion fees a little earlier. So that is something that you can negotiate in temp to hire, and temp to hire can just be really great. And the temp to hire is also something that you can share with your direct hire clients as an option if they're not kind of on the fence about hiring somebody, and if the person's available and willing to do temp to hire. This sometimes can work really well if they're not working yet, if they're unemployed. And temp to hire can be a really good way of trying someone out, because who really can tell from an interview? I mean, literally. And then you're not worried about that. You're not worried about that guarantee. Okay, so we talked about why temp staffing and the basics of temp staffing. And you might be wondering, how do I do it all? How do I put it together? Okay, so there are services called employer of records or employers of record, and they're going to help you get set up. And if you're convinced now, you can just message me and I will walk you over there and introduce you to the people who are ready to get you up and going. And I spend a lot of time interviewing employers of record and doing things like that for my clients to make sure that we have the best people available to help you. And it's generally a pretty easy setup. They help you with compliance. They also sometimes help with credit checks from the clients, making sure that your clients are going to pay on time. And they manage administrative tasks as well as onboarding, payroll, compliance. You can really quickly add temp employees in multiple states and get your insurance coverage. And not only that, but invoicing as well, and collections, accounts receivable, which all of these things can take up so much time, not only your management time, but also costs and cost of having employees doing all these things, and the risk of not doing them right, which is really important when you have all these employees. Is really important to do it right. And so when you use an employer of record services, they are actually the employer. So you're not having co-employee issues when you're working with an employer of record. So just let me know. You can DM me on LinkedIn or hit me up, and I'll show you. I'm going to tell you a little later in this presentation how I can help further. But if you just all you want is an introduction to an employer of record, I am happy to do that. Okay, so now we talked about why to do it and how to do it, and now how do you get started? Let's talk about getting started in temp staffing. Okay, and how do you get clients? People ask me that all the time, like, what's the difference in selling staffing than selling direct hire? Well, some things we already talked about is that now you know how to talk about bill rate and pay rate and conversion fees, and also desired salary should that person be temp to hire. But now, how do you get started? How do you actually get clients? Well, the first thing to do is talk to all of your clients, which you need to be doing anyway. You need to know, with your clients, your current recruiting clients, how much business are they giving to third-party vendors? Do you even know that? So find out, like, have a really in-depth conversation with your clients. And this is going to show you, even if you decide not to do staffing, having an in-depth conversation with your clients is so that you can understand things that you might be missing out on. You might think you have a big client share there. You might think you have most of their business, and you might not. So talk to all of your clients and ask them where they're using contractors. Ask them, if they're not using contractors, where do they see that contractors could help? Let them know that you're doing it. You can tell them, now I'm set up to do contractors. And you can even do it before you're set up, because it's going to be really easy it's really easy to get set up with an employer of record. And you can make announcements. And once you recruit contractors, it's pretty easy. I'm not going to say that biz dev is easy, but it's a lot easier then you're going to understand, like, who's hiring contractors. You can do MPC if you know what MPC marketing is. If not, we talk about that in my program. And you can put the puzzle pieces together and get business deals that way. But if you're offering contractors also with permanent job orders, so anytime you're talking to a client when you're taking a direct hire order, tell them that you also do contractors. Ask them, hey, by the way, where do you use contractors? We do that also. Talk to all of your clients. You're inevitably going to get some orders either now or in the near future for contractors. You'll probably get some perm placement orders too. And remember, this doesn't mean that you're stopping doing perm placement. It just means that perm placement is now going to be the icing on the cake. So you're going to get that when you get those like $30,000, $50,000, $60,000 fees. It's going to be like, woohoo! It's going to be so exciting. It's not going to be like, oh my gosh, I hope that closes so that I can pay myself this month. Okay, so now you understand the basics of temp staffing. You understand the landscape and the market opportunity, as well as how it works, how the margins work, how much money you can make from it, and how to start selling. So I'm Diane Prince, and I help recruiting agency owners through all of these steps. And whether you need just introductions to the people that can help you to fund you and get you started, or if you're looking for a lot of help, if you want executive consulting, we can talk about that and how the services that I can offer you that will best serve your needs in building your temp staffing agency. So I'm Diane Prince. I hope this was super helpful to you. Let me know if you have any questions. I am on a mission to help agency owners to stop living placement to placement, get off that roller coaster, and enjoy the life that recurring revenue and the peace of mind that it can give to you along the way.